I think sometimes we have so many choices available to us that are very godly. Like it's not more or less godly to have your kids in sports or do mission work, because as a believer, you're being a light in whatever you're doing.
Welcome to the Simplified Organization podcast, 15-minute conversations with real moms about managing our homes and family life cheerfully to the glory of God. We can actually enjoy housework and love being homemakers when we focus on truth and work with gratitude. I'm Mystie Winckler, homemaker now for 22 years, homeschool mom of 5 with 2 graduates now, and author of the book, Simplified Organization, Learn to Love What Must Be Done. I write and podcast at Simply Convivial, and I run Convivial Circle, a community helping women to excel at homemaking and do life cheerfully. And today I'm joined by Jennifer Pepito.
Hi, Mystie. Thanks so much for having me today.
Yeah, great to have you. Jennifer is the host of the Restoration Home podcast and author of the brand new book, Habits for a Sacred Home. She's also the founder of Peaceful Press, and she is on a mission to help moms overcome fear and live with wonder and purpose. Her homeschool curriculum empowers this through heroic stories, heartwarming poetry, and engaging life skills development. Jennifer lives in the mountains with her family, where she enjoys reading aloud, working in her garden, and watching the sunset. So thank you so much for joining me, Jennifer.
Well, thanks for having me, Mystie. It's such a joy to be here. Your work has been such an inspiration to me.
Oh, thank you. Well, I'm excited to hear about this new book that's out. There will be links in the show notes and in the email that I send out with this episode. There's some pre-order bonuses that are very fun. But could you give us maybe just a brief synopsis of what the book is about, what the message of the book is?
Yeah, so the subtitle is 9 Practices from History that can anchor and restore modern families. And I was lucky to get a title and a subtitle that so well defines what the book is about. After the pandemic, I think we both might live in the West Coast, and there was a lot of very intense kind of laws and cultural shifts really that we saw. Like San Francisco used to be a city that I enjoyed going to with my children on field trips, and it became somewhat of a zombie apocalypse. And I'm listening to an Elon Musk, or I was listening to like a podcast with him, and he was saying that partly he bought Twitter because he felt like the ideas that were shaping the zombie apocalypse in San Francisco were being disseminated to the whole world through the platform of Twitter. Like bad ideas that result in chaos and moral decline were being disseminated to the whole world through Twitter. So he bought it. And that was how I felt about that time period. It was like ideas that have never worked, like communism, the riots. Like there were so many things that were very counterproductive to a healthy civilization. They were actually being almost touted as good. And it made me feel like we were in like a free fall, like society was on the way down and what was going to happen. And during that time, I read a couple of books. One was The Benedict Option, and one was How the Irish Saved Civilization. And both of them talk about how during basically the Dark Ages, the monastic movement saved Western civilization. They saved the scriptures. They saved the canon of classics, really in some ways saved the world. And I thought, wow, that's what we're doing as homeschool moms. Yes. We're in our homes. We're reading the old books. We're not just settling for an ebook or a abridged version or something. We're actually reading real books to our children. We are taking them out in nature where they can actually enjoy real life nature instead of just reading about it and filling in a worksheet about it. and so these practices that we're doing with our children, this isn't even just for homeschool moms, like so many regular moms who are eating a meal with your children, or taking them on a hike in the forest, or cleaning up the kitchen with your children after dinner instead of just leaving everything in chaos. You are those people who are changing the world. Like the practices of the world at large may be very counterproductive and destabilizing for society, but the things that we're doing, the regular things that we're doing, are very stabilizing for society. And that's what this book is all about, is that these basic habits that probably you're already doing have the potential to save the world.
Love that. I read that book a long time ago, but I've had my kids read it too. It's such an interesting take and reminder of like just keeping something going in a small little area does have the potential to have a larger impact in the world.
Yeah. And you even look at like some of the examples that I use in the book are Sabina Wurmbrand and Edith Schaefer. And Edith Schaefer, she was just hosting people in the mountains of Switzerland. There was no social media. She didn't necessarily have a big platform at the time, but she did write a lot of books that many of us still read and enjoy. But even more so, her daughter, Susan Schaefer Macaulay, wrote books like For the Family's Sake and For the Children's Sake that had become guiding lights for many homeschool families and kind of hopeful messages. So her work and not just those, not just Susan Schaefer Macaulay, but even people like Os Guinness and we don't even know the generations after Os Guinness who are influenced by the movement and Labrie. And then Sabina Wurmbrand, like her and her husband founded Voice of the Martyrs, which has had a huge impact around the world in supporting persecuted Christians. And they were just being faithful during the rise and fall of communism to love their neighbors and love the people in their own circle, and then ended up starting a ministry that changed the world. So many moms aren't going to necessarily start some big ministry like Labrie or Voice of the Martyrs, but just the faithful things you're doing might be the inspiration to your children or a neighbor. We don't even know how many people are being touched by the gospel just by us living a holy life.
Yes. Yeah. So I think you're kind of getting into this a little bit. It's habits for a sacred home. So what is a sacred home?
Yeah, that's such a good question. That is actually the question I'm getting asked a lot because it can almost be a little daunting. One of the titles they wanted was like habits for a happy, holy home. And I was like, I cannot guarantee any such thing. I'm sorry. I mean, I have 7 children. They all have different personalities. I cannot guarantee that all of the children in your home will be happy and holy. But sacred is a different thing because sacred just means consecrated to God. And that is something that we can do. Like I can, in all my feeble mothering and my confusion and my self-doubt that leads me to make wild decisions or big changes or whatever it is, I can still consecrate my home to God and recognize that my home has this world-changing potential. Charlotte Mason and Saint Benedict called their monastery or their teaching college a school for the service of the Lord. And that is what our homes are. Our homes are a school for the service of the Lord. And so, yes, maybe we'll make mistakes. Sacred doesn't equal perfect, but we can consecrate our homes to the Lord and do our best by his grace to raise children who love him. But not even just that, be faithful ourselves, because this message, Habits for a Sacred Home, isn't just for young moms who are still homeschooling. This is for the moms who maybe all their kids have graduated and you're a little shocked right now that they're not all doing exactly what you hoped or taught that they would do. And so many veteran homeschool moms can have experienced that pain of seeing a child who does something that you're like, what? I taught you better than that. But this is for you too, to just be faithful. Like you don't know at the end of the day what impact your lifestyle of faithfulness will have. We don't see the fruit when we're in the middle of the sowing season. And so even in those young adult years, you're still in the sowing season. And so you just have to keep being faithful to the word of God and to these basic habits, these basic Christian habits like prayer and work and stability, and then let God produce the harvest.
Yeah. I like to say the work is ours, but the results are God's. And he's so much more patient than we are with those results and what he's working out in everything.
This is true.
So I was excited to see in the description for your book that you said it's 9 habits in this book, but you're calling it a rule of life, which, goes back to Saint Benedict. There's been like different iterations of this that I remember seeing in the homeschool mom world over a decade ago. And I always found those helpful and a great way to put together something to help keep my priorities in check. So I'm excited that you're kind of expanding on this idea. Would you explain what a rule of life is?
Yeah. And in the past, I would have called it more like my essentials or my family vision, or I would have written it down in a different way, just a way, it's a way of expressing what your values are as a family. And for our family, having those values defined has been so important. Like, we have made decisions that have cost us financially or that have been harder than some other thing we might have done. But because we had a very big yes to the Lord, and our priorities as a family were worship and prayer and supporting missions and some of these values that were very clear for us, then we could say yes to God and sometimes do things that were a little hard for our family, trusting that this was our family rule or our family vision. And so even though it looked different than what a lot of people were doing, we could stay true to what God had called us to. And so I have for a long time just encouraged people to write down a family vision. I talk about it even in my first book, Mothering by the Book. And that's a part of like my Peaceful Life course. So, but a family rule is maybe even a little bit more overarching. Like, it's defining what is really important to you as a family in terms of your values, so that the things that you do align with your values. I think sometimes we have so many choices available to us that are very godly. Like, it's not more or less godly to have your kids in sports or do mission work, because as a believer, you're being a light in whatever you're doing. It's not more or less godly to have your kids in choir or speech and debate. Those are really personal choices that are kind of your choice to make, depending on the things that you love and the way God's made you. But I think that there are all kinds of choices we have, but ultimately, what is the guiding value? I think it can be really hard to make decisions. But when you have like an overarching family rule that says, as a family, we are in pursuit of virtue, we're in pursuit of becoming more like God. And the way that we do this by continually saying yes to God, which might mean saying no to other things. Like, as a family, we actually did say no in large part to sports, to expensive hobbies. There was a lot of things that we said no to because we were saying yes to spending Christmas in Assisi, praying where St. Francis prayed, or saying yes to going to Tanzania and doing a marriage conference for missionaries. So there were a lot of things that our family said yes to because we were saying no to other things. But it was very clear that we were doing our best as a family to listen to God so we could say yes to him.
Yeah. Yeah. I think so often it's easy to get discouraged by looking around and seeing in our families, in our homes, all the bad habits everyone has. And it's like everyone is spending too much time on their phones. We're all running this direction and that direction. And we have these bad habits as a family. And we want to get rid of bad habits, but we can't really just get rid of bad habits. We have to have good habits to put in their place. So how would you encourage women to look at those bad habits that they're noticing in their homes and how to approach maybe moving the direction of the family culture and the atmosphere of the home?
Yeah. In my Restoration Home group, we talk a lot about 1% improvement, because I think when you try to make big sweeping changes, like, oh, we're getting rid of all tech right now and we're use tech again. Like, when we do big things like that, it often ends up in failure and then a sense of shame, and then we give up. But if we start with just a small, like, I will read my Bible and journal before I pick up my phone, or we will have morning time and read the Bible together every morning. Like, if you just start with a small change that doesn't take the whole day, I think that we can start to see like an improvement and more connection, which makes it easier then to make the next change. For in our family, like, we really focus on connection, like making sure we're having eye contact, even with, like, now my youngest are 15 and 17, but they still need eye contact. They still need hugs. They still need me to just sit there and listen to them instead of being on my phone in front of them, even though we're both doing legitimate stuff. And so I think that focusing on some of these really basic habits, like habits of connection, habits of prayer and scripture reading, habits of eating a meal together. These are really small habits that maybe you're already doing, but they do sort of gently push your family towards more health and more connection and more structure.
So if there was like one habit from the book that you think would be a great place to start, or maybe an easy one to kind of get the ball rolling, what would it be?
Yeah, one of the things that I've talked about as one of the first habits is probably forgiveness, because often what really derails us is feeling ashamed or bitter. I've heard women like complain, they're mad at their husbands because he's not on board. And so then they don't try at all. Or they're so disappointed in themselves. Like they tried to have a good day where they read the Bible to their kids, or they did morning time and read out loud, and nobody cooperated. And so then they're just like, I'm such a failure, forget this. But shame and bitterness are saboteurs of progress. But when you can take time to like, it's okay, feel the feelings, like understand you felt this way, this person did this, it's all real to you. But you have to then be able to say, okay, I felt unsupported, I felt abandoned, I felt like nobody was on the same page, I felt like I didn't have any help in teaching my kids, or I felt like I just failed again, I yelled at my kids, and I feel like I can't do anything right. Like it's okay to sort of name how you feel, but then say, and I forgive myself, I forgive myself for the ways that, because God has forgiven me, I forgive myself for the ways that I let my own children down, or the way I let down my ideals, or I didn't follow the Lord, I didn't obey, or I forgive my husband for the ways that he didn't support our family vision, or the way that he didn't live up to what we talked about already, and just really be thorough about it. I feel like it's sometimes we talk about forgiveness as this light thing, like, oh, you just have to forgive. But when you don't acknowledge the pain that you've experienced, it's almost like putting a band-aid over a wound and expecting it to heal when you didn't even clean out the wound. So the cleaning out the wound is like taking the time to actually grieve or acknowledge. It doesn't have to take a long time. It could be a journal entry, it could just be 5 minutes. And I think that's why in the monasteries, they actually had a process of examine, where at the end of the day, they would sort of identify what made me feel unrest today and what made me feel happy, and just kind of understand like what's going on underneath. Because so often as moms, we just get busy and we keep staying so busy that we never even have a chance to evaluate, like, why am I so angry with my children? Or what is making me so apathetic and without any agency in my life? But if we can take some time to examine, and maybe it means we need to forgive, or maybe we need to meditate on scripture more in some way, kind of check our mindset, then we will be able to put these habits into practice. And one more thing I want to mention is the habit of happiness. I was just talking with the Read Aloud Revival community, and as I was talking about joy in there, someone mentioned that there was a study done where people who journaled just the whatever they felt like were in one group, and people who journaled thankfulness, like things they were thankful for, were in another group. And the people who journaled thankfulness actually ended up being happier people. And so there's so much research that says that we can make ourselves happier by thinking happier thoughts. And so I think, I mean, maybe even, especially after you've done forgiveness, start just making a habit of being aware of all the good things in your life instead of continually focusing on what's wrong.
Yeah, it's so easy to focus on the negative and see all the things that aren't going our way and the things that we would like to be better. But there is also so much to be grateful for.
So true. And I think when you look at these women that I feature in my book, I'm sure most of them at times felt like things were a mess, or like they were failing. Even Edith Schaefer, like her son left the faith. He wrote a mean book about them. And then at the end of his life, his obituary to his mom said, "Your example won me over, I believe." And so I think we really do have to keep our eyes and our minds focused on the goodness of God and the truth that he is good. And that the Psalm 37 was a big inspiration in this. It says, "Yet a little while and the wicked will be no more, but the meek will inherit the earth and delight themselves in the abundance of peace." And so really focusing on the truth that God is with us and God is for us can help us to remain steady and faithful and hopeful, even in the midst of hardship.
So good. So helpful. So tell us when your book is out.
Yeah. Available now and everywhere. And you can go to habitsforasacredhome.com though. And that is the page where there's a few order bonuses, like this Peaceful Life workshop where I kind of guide you through writing down your family essentials, and a poetry pack for homeschool moms. I know we love reading poetry out loud. And so I included some of the ones that we've been using in the Restoration Home community this year, like the Apostles' Creed and Psalm 23 and Psalm 100, and a few of my favorite poems as well that kind of go along with the values that we feature in Habits for a Sacred Home.
Oh, that's so great. It's so good to put truth, goodness, and beauty into our heads and let that come out of our lives.
It's so true, Misty. It squeezes out some of the darkness when we meditate on the goodness of God.
So thank you so much for joining me today, Jennifer. And I'll have the links for the book and the extras in the show notes. So thank you.
Thanks for having me, Misty. What fun to get to chat with you today.